Hi, my name is Timothy Hunt, and I'm the director here for Personal Counseling Services. Welcome to Flyers Take Flight. On this episode of Flyers Take Flight, we are interviewing Dr. Julie Voigt. Dr. Julie Voigt currently serves as the Dean of Instruction for Sandhills Community College and resides in Pinehurst, North Carolina, with her husband and 4 children. She's been a faculty member here for over 10 and a half years and has been teaching in the discipline of sociology for over 15 years. Her studies and interest in teaching has focused on race and ethnic relations in the United States. She received her PhD from the University of North Carolina doing research specific to discussions on systems of oppression and teaching in the classroom. She is committed to holistic education and believes in the community college's mission to provide access and opportunity to all students regardless of academic ability and life circumstances. She believes in incomparable worth of all human beings, in which as educators we have the honor and great responsibility to take people from where they are and carry them as far as they can go. She is committed to teaching and learning and believes that education is a lifelong pursuit that enhances and changes people's lives for the better.
I'm actually a military brat. I was born in Fort Bragg, and so it's interesting that I actually came around about to Sandhills. But when I was 8, we traveled, of course, relocated. But when I was 8, my parents separated, and my mom and I moved to North Carolina. We went from being a middle-class family, and I felt like, 8 years old, I guess those are some time of your formative years, but how devastating. I can remember that feeling to being just in poverty. Yeah. And like the things that we had, those luxuries were no longer. And my mom, who had not been working, all of a sudden was working, and she didn't have the support, and we were barely making it. I can remember there were times where there wasn't enough food. I remember times, where she would pull out flour and water and mix it together and put it in the oven and make a biscuit for me. And that's what I would have to take to school for lunch. And I remember being extremely embarrassed. And even though there were the free lunches, it was always I would rather not eat than be labeled. And so there were some really tough experiences. And then my mom, I know that she did the best that she could, but once I became a teenager, I think she tied so much of her identity in me that it wasn't even it was like we were friends in so many ways, and that I ended up very much being the person taking care of her. And then things fell apart when she met my stepfather, who actually recently passed away in December, and they met when I was 16, and then I found myself alone. Mm-hmm. She moved to Burlington, and I was living in the condo that we were in, and it became a situation of either you find a way to afford this or you move out, and I didn't have anywhere to go. And so it felt, that brings up a lot of stuff, but struggling just to survive. And I don't know if I feel like a part of when I see our students, it's just whether they're going through, some type of, domestic situation, which I've heard and talked to students with that, they're struggling to eat. I mean, I can recall the difference between deciding whether I was going to go to school or buy a taco. And it just seems so extreme, but looking for a couple of bucks, under the couch or even in the car, and having to really make the decision of, can I go to school or do I work? Yeah. My mom, of course, was a single parent all by herself. She didn't have any college education. She had a high school degree, and she was trying really hard just to make ends meet. And so I spent, from 8 years old until 17 watching my mom work extremely hard as a certified nursing assistant. And of course, at that time, the pay, minimum wage at best.
Yeah.
And, my mom never had the conversations in her house about the expectation of education or going on to college. And we never had those conversations in my house at all. I feel like I kind of coasted through high school. I felt like I wasn't smart, that at best maybe I would get married and the once upon a time story would happen to me. I don't know, just those perspectives as a kid and the messages that you receive. And I ended up, graduated from Northwest High School, and I got my certification as a CNA as well, and I worked for about a year doing that and quickly realized that, one, that is one of the hardest jobs that one can ever have in terms of caring for individuals. And I worked with Alzheimer's and dementia patients. But that I knew that I couldn't survive just by myself. Recognizing that I needed to do something else if I was going to survive. And so I ended up going to Guilford Technical Community College. My first semester, I dropped out. I didn't drop any of my classes. I just completely walked away. I don't need this. I need to get another job. I need to make money. Because a lot of times, even I was sleeping on my friends' couches, rotating between and different. I didn't have any family in the vicinity, and so just trying to make ends meet and trying to make good decisions, and not knowing really what that was, honestly. And I just dropped out, and I didn't go back to drop any of those classes. And when I did try to return, I had, of course, the FWs on my transcript. I remember 4 of them. And I remember being devastated by it. And I went and saw every single professor and begged,
Wow.
Can you please give me a WP? Can you? And I look back and I remember there were 2 professors who were just like, did you learn from this? Do you realize what you need to do going forward? You're capable of doing this. And just remembering, that's the first time I've ever heard anybody say that to me. And I was like, yes. It felt like for a moment somebody cared about me and thought that I had the ability to continue. And I didn't think that about myself at the time. It was almost like a shade or something had been lifted, like I had been blind for so long, in the sense. I don't know if that makes any sense really, but
Absolutely makes sense.
it felt like I was worth something. And looking back, I don't think I felt that. I guess it just felt like that somebody was interested and somebody cared. And I tell my students, I learned 2 really extremely valuable lessons during that time. One, thank you, the lesson of forgiveness and encouragement, and that somebody believed in me. And then I had 2 professors who said no. And at that time I was really angry. Looking back though, their teaching was different. Because they said, no, you didn't do what you needed to do, and you need to be held accountable for that, and this is the consequence of that. You can retake the course, and you can replace that grade, and it will not impact your GPA, but no. And so I learned the balance between forgiveness and understanding and encouragement and accountability and an expectation and standard as a college student, that I was making my own decisions and that I did need to be held accountable. And so both of those lessons are extremely important in moving forward. And, I think about even here at the community college, the beauty of the faculty of all educators that we work with, that there is this kind of continuum of expectation. And it's Like, you have individuals who will bend over backwards and are extremely flexible and willing to work with you. But you do have people who are like, this is the expectation. And I respect both equally.
Yeah.
I really do.
You need it. You need that.
Yeah.
You need that.
And that's why it's so important, that there are different types of people teaching and sharing those life lessons with you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel like there's a right or wrong in that, it's just different.
Right. When you think about the term belonging, how do you define it?
Belonging. That I matter, that people see me, that they recognize that I'm more than just my intellect or academic ability, that I have things going on in my life that impact me, that I am messy and complicated.
Yeah.
And that's why I think, going back to looking at education holistically, every individual comes to this college with varying degrees of experience and hardship and heartache and success. And just to be seen, just to be seen. It's amazing how far it goes for a student, in my experience, when you just say their name.
Yep.
Or you pronounce their name correctly.
Yeah.
Or you make an effort to do that.
Yeah.
That when someone says to you, you did a really good job on this project, or I was really inspired by what you wrote the other day.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe belonging is just about being seen.
In your story, look at what those two professors did by seeing you and holding you accountable. Look at where that got Dr. Julie Voigt today.
Like, I think about all the things that I've experienced in my life and how far I've come, and definitely have not done that by myself. I can remember, years trying to be something or somebody, and I want to be authentic. I want to be transparent. Obviously, there's still pain, but that's who I am. But, I wouldn't change any of the stuff that's happened to me at all. Because I feel like it's made me resilient.
Yep, absolutely. And
I feel like it's made me a better person. Because it helps me see who I want to be. The kind of person I want to be, especially for my children. So Dallas Herrick, he's the father of the North Carolina Community College system, in which, when he started initially, was the providing opportunity regardless and taking people as far as they can go, no matter what their academic ability, life circumstances, socioeconomic status, that education is about opportunity. And it's just been an inspiration of the things that he has talked about. And I want people to know that I care about them, and I genuinely care about people. I want to see them be successful. And I recognize, that we make bad decisions. That doesn't define who we are. Our decisions they don't make up our entire life story. Somewhere along the way, I figured out that that's, if anything, my mission or philosophy in life is to, one, aspire to help people get where they want to go. And I believe in people, and I believe in what we're capable of, and that's kind of been my mission, really, truly, in addition to how that intersects with sociology, and that being about equity and opportunity, and that everybody deserves to have a life where they can take care of themselves and their families.
Absolutely.
Every single person.
Absolutely.
Regardless of religious ideology or political beliefs, no matter where you stand, we all have value, and I think that's really important to remember as educators, because it is an honor. It's an honor to do what we do. I really hope that I can do as much as I can with the time that's been given to me to help people. I mean that goes back to even sociology. I feel like sociology so much gave me the answers that I was trying to understand about my life and how these situations, everything from, being poor to even the impact of being what it means to be female, to the impact of, what it means to have a single mom, and just starting to understand statistics and understanding those stories, and understanding too, and this goes back to never made this connection honestly, but those statistics are not just numbers, they're people's lives.
Yep.
And somewhere along the way, when you start to really look at those numbers, you realize that you're not alone. That there are things at play in this world that you don't have control over. And there are people who are feeling that along with you. And maybe that's what I enjoy so much about sociology, is it's such the big picture perspective. And it's not focused on the individual per se, although we recognize that that's extremely important. But it's about looking at people's experiences in groups, the collective, and how those experiences shape us in this world. And it brings to light the inequities that exist, and the structures that are at play. It brings into the conversation of power, and it brings into the conversation of privilege, right? And I know the terminology privilege is a challenging one, but privilege, all of us have privilege in some capacity, right? If you're an able-bodied individual, you have privilege because you can walk into this institution and you have access, and so that exists within all of these social categories, or what I call social locations, and they intersect. Well, tell you what, in the 15 years that I've been teaching sociology, I had mentioned that one of my major focuses has always been on race and ethnic relations specific to the United States, as we have such an interesting history. But I tried for many years to force people being my students, to see the inequities, like to want them to feel as passionate as I do, to want to change the world, to understand the complexities and the racism and the things that exist within our institutions. But it always got caught up between that passion and sharing the information with people's individual stories. We have such a hard time disconnecting me from the rest of the world. And so it becomes more of, that's not me. I didn't contribute to that. I'm not racist. I'm not sexist. Because we're not taught, interesting enough, and I think it's more of American culture, we're very individualistic. So we're not taught to identify ourselves specifically in certain groups as a part of a collective.
I agree.
And so that makes it really difficult to try to address those issues when you don't feel like you're contributing to or a part of a system. You think you are absent of that.
Right.
So that's...
Give an example of that, Julie, for our listeners.
So an example of that would just relates to even what's going on today and talking about racism and systems of oppression, right? Or the argument about, all lives matter versus Black Lives Matter.
Right.
And the resistance to the notion of Black Lives Matter, right? And trying to explain that in, of course, all lives matter.
Right.
Of course.
Right.
But the difference is, for example, I have a house and my children are safe inside and we have everything that we need. And then my next door neighbor's house is burning down. And their children are screaming inside. And their children matter. And what it's saying in terms of Black Lives Matter is, please pay attention to how we are suffering.
Right.
I need a water hose. And for me to turn and say to somebody, but all lives matter.
Right.
I don't need that water hose to put out that fire.
Right.
I don't have to talk to my sons about, I can spend, my entire time with my children and the relationships that I have with them, never once talking about race, unless it's talked about in the context of society, right? And in the news. And even that gets spinned.
Mm-hmm.
And so the resistance that is there is not saying that we're more important or you should pay attention to us because, you owe us something. It is a cry for help.
Mm-hmm.
It's a cry for acknowledgement. It's a cry for, please see me. Please see my suffering. I have never belonged and I want to be a part of this. Please help me.
Right.
And that's how I interpret it.
Right.
But it's difficult for individuals to see that because they don't see themselves as a part of a group or a collective in the sense, right? And specifically, I'm talking about me as a white person, right? And so that's kind of the resistance that I would get in my classrooms where, well, I have, I've done this or I've done that. And it's like, no, you got to take a step back, look at education, look at the numbers, look at poverty, look at the numbers, look at mental illness, look at who's more likely to die, from disease, look at who's most, impacted by what we would consider structural, environmental racism in communities that have more pollution. Look at the larger perspective. I'm not saying that you're a bad person. I don't think you're a bad person. I think you've inherited a system, and I think that I believe in our worth, all of our worth. And so
Yes.
if you believe that, then help. I wrote my whole dissertation, honestly, on resistance and specific to race and ethnicity. And my dissertation very much feels like part of my soul was bared in the sense. And what I ended up doing is writing stories about my contributions to a system. Because I felt as if, how can I ask, as people who are trained to see things individually, how can I ask them to join me? How can I ask them to see if I'm not willing to be there, to go there, to say, well, this is what I've done, and this is how I've contributed, and this is how I was socialized.
Wow.
And so I wrote those stories, those narratives, in response to different questions that were, my students would ask me, so that I could find a way to join them. And I think that that's what you have to do. Not above any of this, that, and I recognize that, and I'm not afraid of that, and I'm not afraid to be wrong, and I'm not afraid for people to call me out. I want to live my life with real relationships with people who care enough about me to tell me when I've messed up.
It's important.
Yeah. And so
It's
I try to have those conversations even individually within the context of whatever it is we're talking about. And then to focus on statistics as well. When you take a look at who we serve, we have to look at our student population. We have to look at what are we doing in Hope County?
Right.
Who is being impacted?
Right.
Who needs more resources? And that goes back to that notion of equity versus equality, right? We like that idea that we're all equal, but that's not true, right? That's not true. That's some type of dream, right? In a sense. But truly, when you think about equity, it's about meeting people where they are. And so that, I think, is more important, and as educators, I can't force people to believe things. I can join them where they're at and I can try to help. And that's always been my approach. And I think equity is extremely important. And so when you see groups that are struggling financially, you know, in terms of education and success, then you put the support there to help. Because they are the most vulnerable. Why would we not want to serve and provide additional resources to the most vulnerable? That goes back to the idea of my house isn't on fire, but yours is. I don't need the water hose. Why wouldn't I want somebody else to have that?